We will also be considering a number of ceremonial resolutions to celebrate the success of the Johnson Middle School football team, and voting on our proposed budget as a board. On Monday, the state board held our first fall engagement session, which is one of, or regarding 3 work streams for the board related to educational governance, our social studies standards revisions, as well as school accountability, or revisions to the DC STAR framework. The event was held at the Deanwood Recreational Center, and it was a fantastic opportunity for the state board to address and work alongside the public on these important matters. The state board will hold our next engagement session at the Martin Luther King Jr. Library on December 4th, and we welcome all members of the public to join us for that discussion. You can register for that event through our website or via any of our social media channels, and we look forward to seeing you there. Before we continue with the meeting, I did want to offer a few updates. Representative Thompson alerted us that there are vaccinations going forward for children ages 5 through 11 at Plummer. And I'm not quite sure where the numbers are at this moment, but there seems to be quite a few available slots. So for all those who are eager to get their child vaccinated, who may be watching this, we highly encourage you to take advantage of the vaccinations available at Plummer, and they will be there until 7:30 p.m. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the participation of several of my colleagues and board members in the Dancing with the Scholars scholarship event that occurred this last weekend. Representatives Reid, Representatives Thompson, and Representative Sutter all represented the board very well. And congratulations, Representative Thompson, for taking home the gold. For those that may not be familiar with the Dancing with the Scholars program put on by the Lockridge Foundation, it is a benefit that raises funds to support students east of the river through scholarships to expand their opportunities and access to DC and various educational programming. And then last but not least, we want to publicly acknowledge Representative O'Leary. It is his birthday, and I'm sure I'm embarrassing him right now, but I did want to, on the record, just wish him a very happy birthday. We appreciate all the work that he does on behalf of the board. And so with that, before we go on with our meeting, I would like to take a moment of silence to honor and remember the lives that we've lost due to the ongoing pandemic. Thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to Acting Superintendent Grant for a statement before moving on in our meeting. So Dr. Grant, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good evening, representatives, and thank you, President Parker, for allowing me to be with you all this evening. It's always good to be with you all during your public session. This evening, I'd like to provide some updates to you and all of the viewers and all the residents on the steps that we're taking to keep our students and educators safe at school as we continue to fight against COVID-19. I also want to take the opportunity to respond to some of the commentary provided at the panel on rethinking accountability. Over the past few weeks, we've been fortunate to find new hope in our fight against COVID-19 with the announcement of a vaccine for children ages 5 to 11. I'm pleased to see the excitement around the new vaccine, and I'm glad to see some of our youngest Washingtonians taking their shot. The vaccine is safe and lowers the chance of children getting and spreading COVID-19. The vaccine is 90% effective at preventing symptoms of COVID-19. The vaccine is available at more than 60 pharmacies, hospitals, and health centers across all 8 wards. I strongly encourage parents and guardians to vaccinate their children and themselves if they have not done so already, as soon as possible. I got my booster shot yesterday at the supermarket across the street from my home. Signing up was quick and it was painless. Please visit the district's COVID-19 website to find out additional information on how to receive the vaccine at coronavirus.dc.gov. OSSI continues to support schools in meeting the asymptomatic testing requirements in the Protecting Our Children Emergency Act of 2021, the recently enacted emergency legislation guiding some of our response efforts to the pandemic. We've made progress in increasing asymptomatic testing in our schools, with 15% of enrolled students being tested for COVID-19 during the week of November 1st and November 8th, respectively. You may find data on asymptomatic testing on the DC coronavirus website, and we are working with DC Health to increase the availability of data on the website to comply with the law's requirements. In addition to the enacted emergency legislation expanding the availability, the recently enacted emergency legislation expanded the availability of distance learning to eligible students defined in the law. OSSI provided new forms to comply with the law. The forms are available and they provide an ability for use for two groups of students when distance learning is recommended by a physician, nurse practitioner, or medical assistant. The first group of students is for those who have a household member with a medical condition at a high risk of contracting COVID-19. The second group is for a student who is at high risk of COVID-19. The law only allowed this pathway for distance learning for students who are ineligible for a vaccine. With the approval of a vaccine for children older than 5 years, this pathway to distance learning is only available for students less than 5 or for students who meet specific requirements. To make a request for distance learning, the form should be completed and submitted to the child's school for review and approval. OSSI has provided the forms and additional detailed guidance on use of the forms on our COVID-19 guidance page. I encourage board members and interested constituents to review those materials. I am pleased that the board remains interested in the review and potential revision of the STAR framework. I know that this work is important to you and everyone, including our learners, and I am pleased to see your efforts for continued engagement on this topic, both in this setting and through other engagement opportunities. This will be a helpful perspective as we come together to engage in this important work. It's important to remember that the Every Student Succeeds Act provides legal parameters for statewide accountability systems. We must abide by these legal requirements as the recipient of federal Title I funds. Revisions to our statewide accountability system must be within the bounds of this important body of law. I encourage board members and interested parties to review these aspects of the law, and if myself or my staff can be of assistance to supporting these requirements, we will strive to be in assistance to you. These parameters are important as they drive the metrics that we use in our system and the way they are weighted in the system. A constructive dialogue on the statewide accountability system must be grounded in the law and in that reality. I also urge the board to utilize the resources that OSSI has made available on the STAR framework, including methodological guides and technical briefs. OSSI has been transparent about the STAR framework each time that it's been published. And although we did not calculate a STAR framework due to the suspension of statewide assessments in the past 2 years, these reports and the information is valuable to undergirding the engagement on the statewide accountability system overall. Further, I look forward to the feedback that you obtain in your engagement efforts, as it will be valuable in our engagement efforts on this topic in the months ahead. As I have conveyed to the board's leadership, this will be an important starting point for our work together. There's still some uncertainty on what exactly states will be required to do in light of the suspension of statewide assessments over the past 2 years, and we continue to await guidance from the United States Department of Education on this information. Finally, I would like to make the board aware of recently published and upcoming data releases. Last week, OSSI published the school year 2020-21 OSSI Local Assessment Collection Report. This report synthesizes the high-level findings from OSSI after reviewing the local assessment portion of the school-level continuous education plans for the 2020-21 school year. This report explains local context for both administration and reporting of assessments, OSSI's key finding from the plans, and the next steps for programmatic support. You may find it on the OSSI website with our information on continuous education plans. Also, as we have discussed in past working sessions, we will release the DC report card in early December. Although this version of the DC report card will not have statewide assessment data since they were suspended in the 2020-21 school year, it will contain a wide range of data on schools, including graduation rates, attendance, enrollment, and much more. We look forward to presenting the board on high-level trends on the DC report card in future working sessions. Again, thank you all for allowing me and affording me the opportunity to be with you once again this evening, and I look forward to listening to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. And we look forward to continuing to work with OSSI, namely on those three priority work streams that we highlighted earlier. We're now going to turn to our Ombudsman for Public Education. And we're very lucky to have Ms. Hayes here with us to just highlight the work that she and her team are doing and how they're fighting and working so tirelessly as a neutral and independent advocate for students and families. And so Ms. Hayes will have an allotted 10 minutes, although I am sure you can have as much time as you need to provide your report and your recommendations. And then we'll do a round of questions following. If I could just say one last thing, it is not lost on me, and I'm sure my colleagues, just how vital the Ombudsman, as well as the Office of the Student Advocate, have been during this pandemic, when many families had questions and didn't know where to turn. I know firsthand that Ms. Hayes has fielded many questions, some of them from me, as I've connecting her with families. And I just truly appreciate the work of this office. And I'm looking forward to this report. So with that, Ms. Hayes, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wow, thank you. That was so nice. I am going to work to stay within my 10 minutes. I've been practicing, so I think I'll get it right. So good evening, everyone. I'm Serena Hayes, the Ombudsman for Public Education in the district. For those who may be unfamiliar, the Office of the Ombudsman is an independent and neutral office housed within the State Board of Education. We work with families to address questions and concerns regarding public education. I'm going to jump into our yearly data. So yearly case comparison. We did experience a steady decline in case volume over the last 2 years. However, the number of cases reflected here does not include every contact made to our office. We filter out our calls through a screening process, and not all contacts that are made to the office are issues that we're authorized to provide interventions for. We take a look at the month-to-month case comparison. You can see, if you take a look at that yellow line, like towards the bottom, it's the 2020, 2021 month-to-month cases. And just taking a deeper look at that, you can see that the trends actually follow the shifts in the pandemic. For us, cases dipped from March of 2020 and continued to be lower until August of 2021, again, due to the pandemic. In August of the current school year, our numbers reached pre-pandemic volume and has since exceeded pre-pandemic volume. Cases by topic. While we experienced fewer cases during last year, the families we supported had multi-layered concerns. Last school year, there was a shift in the most prevalent issues. Families expressed increased concern with academic progress, resource need, which is usually, well, last year, it was really a lot of technology concerns, housing, food insecurity, and the request for mental health supports. Compared to other years, bullying and student safety, discipline, and medical health and wellness cases were much lower than usual. And we do believe that that's also because students were not engaged in learning in person. I'm getting text messages. So special education data. I do want to always take a minute to talk about special education data. So special education, 42% of our cases involve students who receive special education services. Families with special education concerns were most frequently parents of students who already had an IEP. This is about 71% of our cases. This trend has been consistent for the last 2 years. A lot of the concerns that came up with special education during the pandemic were questions about individualized distance learning plans and reports of reduced service hours, insufficient general education support, requests for dedicated aides, and overall a sense of families just feeling overwhelmed having to implement IEPs at home without specialized training. Communication and engagement. So on the communication and engagement concerns, as I said, communication and engagement concerns were identified in over 50% of all of our cases. However, only 8 cases noted communication and engagement as sort of the single issue that they were concerned about. We noticed that communication and engagement concerns often accompany discipline, bullying and student safety cases, academic progress cases, as well as our truancy cases. What was interesting about communication and engagement from last year is that there was a lower representation than expected in special education cases. So moving on to some demographic data. I'm going to take a look at the percentages of cases by grade band. The percentages of cases involving middle school students decreased for us by 8% compared to the previous year. But there was an increase in the percentage of adult student cases, elementary school cases, and the number of cases that do not involve a current student. These cases are often from former students requesting transcripts. Cases by sector. So we track which sector is represented in the complaint that's being made. But typically about 66% of our cases involve traditional public schools and about 26% of our cases involve public charter schools. Last year, the numbers were a little skewed. We think that this is because of the rise in cases that didn't involve a current student. If we take that unknown variable out, then the sector representation is normalized. So on the student ward data, this again is like typical for year after year. We do open cases for stakeholders in all 8 wards. Most of the families reside, or most of the families were residents of wards 5, 7, and 8. Again, this is typical given that most families live in DC, reside in one of these 3 wards. So over the last few years, our office has partnered with the Office of the Attorney General to conduct attendance mediations. Last year, we did about 21 mediations. And families identify the barriers that are impacting attendance. And last year, they expressed that technology and access to technology was the primary barrier that impacted school attendance. Of course, makes sense because all the students were virtual. The second largest barrier that families articulated was housing insecurity. So roughly 25% of the cases that we dealt with, the families did say that they were experiencing housing insecurity. And this was also one of the common barriers for the year before, so 2019, 2020. All right, I'm going to quickly touch on some of our recommendations, but I also want to be clear that this is a very brief summary of the recommendations. So our first recommendation is to develop more options for comprehensive virtual schools. And here it really is to say that maybe the conversation about virtual learning shouldn't completely go away. Before the pandemic, we knew that wide-scale virtual learning was not necessarily something that was contemplated, at least within the casework that we handled. However, there were cases that we supported where access to high-quality virtual learning would have potentially eliminated educational barriers for students. This is particularly true for students who are experiencing safety concerns, severe medical needs, and students who are in care of the district. And for the sake of time, I'm only going to focus on students in care of the district. So students in care of the district are young people who are in foster care, youth detention centers, or possibly incarcerated. And these students often experience significant transitions between LEAs as they are often placed in schools that are located outside of the district. Offering a comprehensive virtual school option would potentially allow these students to remain enrolled in their home state, even when students are placed outside of the district. We know that there have been a lot of issues with transcripts and credits transferring, and having this potential option could be phenomenal for these students. The second recommendation is to improve the truancy referral process in the district. We have observed systemic gaps that exist within the attendance truancy reporting systems. And because of those gaps, we've seen that some of our most vulnerable students fall into the cracks of the system. We've observed instances where student support plans or attendance plans were incomplete, to be kind. We've also seen a lack of follow-up from schools after a CFSA referral. To address some of these issues, we would recommend enhancing training for attendance point of contacts, also developing systems for sharing of the status of CFSA referrals with upper level school staff. And finally, providing systemic interventions to reduce some of the gaps that we see in the truancy referral process. And this might look like providing more transportation support and additional childcare support before and after care specifically. A third recommendation is to ensure that DCPS families can participate in the lottery process equitably. Pre-pandemic, we would get complaints from families, particularly of children who were in self-contained classrooms, and they felt very uninformed about sort of where the classrooms were going to be year to year, as well as uninformed about the quality of the classrooms. And to address this problem, I think DCPS has made some significant efforts. They created a geographic feeder pattern for these classrooms, which I think was implemented this school year. And DCPS also resolved some of the predictability concerns based on the geographic feeder pattern. And it does solve some of the problems that we were seeing in our casework. However, the desire for families has sort of consistently been like they want predictability and they want choice. And it's not clear from the family's perspective where the choice comes in. So thinking through how to create choice within this within the realignment, some possible ideas are to make sure that we're publishing the number of spaces that are actually available in self-contained classrooms, potentially increase seats that are held and reserved for students in self-contained classrooms, and potentially to create an entirely different lottery process for children in self-contained classrooms. The biggest thing is to make sure families receive notification about the realignment, so at least that they're informed about whether they need to participate in the lottery if they don't want their child to go to their geographic location. Questions?
All right, members, we're going to do one round of questions. You will have 3 minutes. And please raise your hand. I'll call on you as I see you in the order in my panel. So first up, I have Representative Reid.
Okay, 3 minutes. I'm going to try. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes, for this report. Could you describe again for me? I have 2 questions. The communication and engagement factor related to the areas that you listed. I wasn't following what was the communication engagement versus can you explain that again?
Yeah, sure thing. And sorry, I'm going to pull it out in my. So you don't have the slide deck. So essentially, communication and engagement overlaps with many other issues consistently. And this is not a new thing. What we saw from the previous year is that overlap and the challenge where communication and engagement became a huge overlap or overrepresented where it should be. Thank you for that. Okay, so take a look at this graph. If you look at the right and you see communication and engagement cases, and then, look at the left and see that blue line, it has the communication and engagement cases. And then on the right, it has all cases. The norm is right where it says communication and engagement, and it's like right in the middle, like that right over that 50% line. So it's about 51%. So anytime that you see that blue line over that 51%, that means there's an excessive number of cases or percentage of cases that are involving that issue in communication and engagement. So here we're highlighting, okay, that makes sense?
Yeah, and can I just, for my clarity, so for instance, if a family called about a discipline issue and it was like, oh, I didn't know my student was suspended because no one called me, is that a communication and engagement issue?
Yeah,
Okay.
Notification, right, all of that becomes communication and engagement. And usually parents are not going to say this was communication and engagement, but we're translating that based off of what they tell us. But if they said that they received, I know the notification, but I disagree with the decision. not communication and engagement.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes it clear for me. I'm also curious, and my final question is related to the virtual option recommendations. Was there any information about like talent? I don't even know. I don't think DC does talented and gifted. I don't know. But like students who might be, you know, on certain academic tracks. Did that ever come up a little bit? Because what I'm noticing in community is sometimes parents are feeling like their students could be pushed more, but sometimes some environment issues that are happening in the school, parents aren't like ready to pull the child out because let's say there's an increase in fights or other things. So I'm just kind of interested, like any information about like students who, I don't know what DC would call it, but it's super talented gifted. Go ahead.
I wouldn't necessarily say, I can't speak to like gifted and talented like type programming, but I can speak to parents whose students were experiencing some level of like distraction or exposure to bullying, where the parents felt like my kid is a good kid and my kid is doing incredibly well in school and this is not working. And I would rather pull my kid out and look for an alternative. But, you know, I need something more than what is offered right now because in school is not working. Yeah, so I am getting more, for us, it's connected to like bullying and student safety. So I'm getting more bullying and safety complaints from parents who are also saying that their kids are very strong academically and sort of like the nerd kid who's getting picked on in school. And I'm using the parents' terminology, not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative O'Leary.
Yes, I have a question about, and it's not in your slide deck because it's about this school year. I've been hearing a lot of information from especially the secondary schools in Ward 4 about violence, fighting, those kinds of things. And I guess my question is, since the beginning of school, what type of complaint has been the most evident to your office?
No, that's a really good question. I appreciate. I will say it's always hard to do these annual reports because we've kind of, by the time we're presenting, we've moved on to the current year. But really the violence in schools, the safety concerns, the bullying concerns, the safe passage issues have been huge. We do prioritize those cases when they come in, and it has made it difficult to get to some of the more academic oriented concerns as consistently as we would like and as quickly as we would like. The other thing that I will say about that is, you know, I said earlier that we're experiencing multi-layered concerns like during the pandemic. And I will say that that has continued during the school year, where I feel like, you know, next year's annual report, I'll be checking all the boxes where it's fed, it's discipline, it's safety, it's communication and engagement, and then some. So the cases are getting more and more complex.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Does your office report that to the deputy mayor or to OSSI or to the mayor or to some? I mean, because it really has been sort of throughout the city that there's been a real uptick in those kinds of incidents, but it doesn't seem to be moved on.
Yeah, fair. Well, I won't speak to whether that's fair. I will say that we do have conversations with stakeholders, some more regularly than others. I will say that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Representative Sutter.
Thank you, President Parker. Thank you, Ms. Hayes, so much for this presentation. As always, I enjoy your recommendations, and I have questions about two of them. So on the truancy referral process, you note that when there is, in your solution, that there's a need for additional transportation support, childcare, other sort of solutions for students' reasons for being truant as part of the referral process. Are there any interventions that are required now as part of the referral process?
I will say like required interventions that are required. So the requirement is for interventions to be provided, depending on, you know, what the student needs or what the family is experiencing. But depending on what the barrier is, that depends on the answer to that question, right? So if the student is experiencing like homelessness, then it triggers McKinney-Vento, and then there's a whole set of interventions that would need to be provided. But that may not be the case if the student is not, right, like homeless. I will say that on the transportation side, the Kids Ride Free cards and the companion passes are sort of common offerings that particularly for families with younger students is just doesn't work. It's when you're taking like 3 kids to different schools, you know, it can be very difficult for families to do that consistently. And then the conflating factor is the childcare. So if before care is full or after care is full, then not only do you have to do the transportation on, you know, the public transportation, you're relying on that, but then like, you know, you don't have childcare. So we have seen a lot of families who have expressed frustration with that.
Yeah, and I'll say I'm hearing that throughout Ward 6, that one of the ways too that childcare is often offered is when the childcare slots come up for before or after care to school, you have to be sitting in front of your computer ready to register right then. And that certainly advantages some families who have, you know, 24/7 computer access over others. So I can see that being a real problem. With the little bit of time I've got left, I want to ask about the DCPS self-contained classrooms. What choice does exist now for a family whose child is in a self-contained classroom? Because I will be honest, I've been under the impression that there's little to no choice that says like, I'm sort of at the mercy of the LEA to place me where my program is.
Yeah, there has never been choice within that process. So the you know, and like I said, the realignment, there's a lot of benefit to that. You know, we definitely have families that we worked with before who had children placed in a self-contained classroom that was on, you know, across the city and a different school than their other children. And they'd asked us to try to work to get their student removed from special education services just so all the kids could go to the same school. Well, this would avoid that scenario altogether. The problem still, though, is that there still isn't choice. And so that the ask is like to build in choice with the realignment.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Ms. Hayes. My time is up.
Thank you. Representative Patterson.
Yes, and I apologize because I am still in transition, but thank you, President Parker. My question was kind of answered by Representative Sutter because I wanted to get back to attendance and truancy, and you kind of answered a lot of what I had in mind in responding to Representative Sutter. But I do want to know, are you seeing differences, so to speak, between what's reported to CFSA between charters and DCPS, so to speak?
I don't have that information. Yeah,
okay.
No, I don't know.
And the reason I ask is because I work at my particular job during the daytime. I work with a charter school, and I know sometimes they look at when they report a little bit differently than what some of the DCPS schools, because I know they're supposed to report on the 10th day of absence, so to speak, a consecutive absence. And I don't always see that happening with some schools. And then with other schools, it does happen, and they may not contact the parent appropriately, so to speak, along that process. So the next thing they know is the parent is receiving a call after the 10th day, and no one has worked with the parent prior to that 10th day and trying to work out the problem. So that's why I was kind of asking the question. But if you don't have that information,
no,
that's
I'm
okay.
sorry. Yeah, I don't have that information at a sector level. I will say the scenario that you just described is very common. Very, very common. I'll tell you a quick story about one student who was impacted by the 80-20 rule. When we called the school, they said they had no idea that the family had received any kind of letter or notification. And then they went into the system, and then they saw that the student was consistently missing the same 2 classes every day, and both of those classes was related to like reading. So it's possible that if someone had looked into it, that maybe the student wasn't going to those classes because maybe he can't read, you know, and maybe there's a level of embarrassment, but like no one was looking. Yeah.
I appreciate that, because I'm seeing a lot of different scenarios where we don't have to go to CFSA if we are addressing it and have a really concrete process that everybody's following prior to getting to that 10th day of absence where we had to report. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Representative Thompson.
Thank you for this. I am curious about more of the information around SPED services and the types of cases you got. And I saw that in the report, it noted that overwhelmingly it was universally people this year trying to access virtual learning and the difficulties with that. I'm curious if there were differences between age groups. So like if early stages maybe did better than, you know, some of our services going to our older students. So I guess that would be my first question. Second, I'm also curious if questions around testing and diagnostics came up as much this year or not, or if that's something that people, you know, that just wasn't as much on their radar as in other years, because we see backlogs sometimes with families trying to get their children identified for services.
Yeah. I'm going to start with the first question and to admit that I don't know. And not only do I not know, but I did not think to analyze the data in that way. And now I'm going to go back and do it. So thank you. And I'll follow up with you. As far as the second question, I think that what we saw last year with the diagnostics is actually that evaluations were happening and they were moving forward much faster than they were at the start of the pandemic. So at the start of the pandemic in March of 2020, all diagnostics stopped, halted, and they were suspended. And then over the summer, you know, everybody went through a process of trying to figure out, well, can we do this virtually? What can we do virtually? What we should do? And then by the time we got back to school, well, maybe like a month into the new school year, we saw evaluations were actually happening. I think in the moments when they were stalled, some of it was because the parents were concerned that some of the behaviors from their student couldn't be observed virtually. So they were unsure of the efficacy of the virtual evaluation. But we did see them push evaluations.
And then I'm curious if there were different types of services that seemed like parents were easier to provide to parents, or if there were, you know, like if there are groupings of like, you know, largely if you needed physical therapy, it wasn't happening for you,
right?
As opposed to speech therapy or something.
Yeah, I think you've said it, right? Like things that require the more physical interaction or touch were harder to provide in a virtual setting. But I mean, a part of what I want to say here is that what we saw in the types of complaints that came in were also from a lot of families whose students were in general education. And like for them, they were seeing, okay, I see a SPED instructor here and I see the teacher here, but I don't see any effort to differentiate the learning. It's exactly the same. So why are we all here? Like this is not helpful. And I think that was a takeaway for a lot of families, you know, whose students were actually in a general education setting. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Representative Wattenberg.
All I wanted to say was thank you very much. It was a great report. And part of what was great is we don't have a lot of information about what happened during the pandemic in schools. So I really think this is fairly unique information. I think it's really terrific. And thank you for collecting it. And that's really what I want to say.
Thank you.
I am not seeing other questions. So I'm going to ask questions myself. Ms. Hayes, two areas I wanted to zoom in on. One, since we have the special education services slide up, the evaluation requested. To me, that 10% was a striking number. In my experience, often it's parents that have questions around the suggestion or the recommendation that a child might need special education services. And so to me, this also anecdotally aligns with what I've heard from a lot of Ward 5 families. Like, I think my child might be behind, or I think my child might need more support. Can you just give more context to like some of the trends around that 10%, around why a parent might be reaching out to your office? Is it that they were making a request of a school and it was not being honored? Was it that they didn't agree with the decision after the process?
Yeah, most of the time it's because the evaluation was requested by the parent and they didn't see movement. Sometimes what happens, because you can make an oral request for an evaluation, and sometimes it's common for us to reach out to the school to say, hey, we talked to this parent and they said that they requested an evaluation, and then the school says, well, we don't have any knowledge or record or information about that. So, again, most of it is the parents asking. There have been a few cases where the school, well, I'll say two things. One, there's been situations where the school recommended that the student be evaluated and there was pushback on the parent side, like they didn't feel comfortable with it. I do think that there is still a stigma to being labeled as a student with a disability or being in special education services and feeling as though once your child gets in the system, that they're not going to get out. And parents were looking for intensive interventions without the special education label. So that has come up. It has also come up where schools a school has asked for coaching support on how to even have a conversation with a parent to tell them that they think that their student might need special education services or to be evaluated, because they don't want to offend the parent and they want to make sure that they're doing their due diligence.
We don't have to talk about it now, but that would be fascinating to see that broken down by LEA, not only because it's a legal matter, but it just also might shed light to how we might better support parents if we're noticing that parents are running into common barriers. And I'm running short on time, but I would just say with the CFSA referrals, based on the data, it seems like they are not closing the loop once the investigation is done, nor is the data centrally located. Is that accurate?
So I can't speak about location of central data. That is not my area of expertise. But what I can say is that what happens once a school does a CFSA referral is it becomes tracked. And in most instances, CFSA doesn't have enough to move forward with an investigation. But when you talk to the school says, well, I referred to CFSA. But CFSA is supposed to report back to the school which track the referral fell on. So if it was one of the referrals that didn't meet the standard for an investigation, the person who filed the report to CFSA is supposed to get that notification. It is not consistently clear to me, one, because attendance point of contacts may change at a school, and oftentimes the attendance point of contact is not like the school principal, right? It's just it's not clear what happens after you get that notification. And what I'm saying is we can't just leave it as I did a CFSA referral. Let's go back and let's work on doing those interventions.
Absolutely. That is my time. So many more questions, but thank you. This is really insightful. Ms. Hayes, I just want to do one last scan. Members, are there any other questions? I am not seeing any. To members of the public, this information will be, Vice President Gasoi, is that a question?
I was going to just say you can have my time if you like.
Well, yeah, no, I was just, thank you. I will not take up all of that time. I just wanted to pick up where you left off, Ms. Hayes, around the referral, but we noted before that there's been a significant increase in referrals, I think upwards of 3,000 over the course of this pandemic. And it seems as though demographic data has not been made available publicly. My guess would be, though, parents in wards 5, 7, and 8 will make up a majority of those referrals. And so a concern I have and a question I would offer you is, like, what are the barriers that parents face in this referral process? So what I'm hearing you say is that the loop is not being closed, but in terms of the investigation, what are the consequences if the parents are not following through? And I would imagine, in addition to the stress of this whole process, there are like some legit barriers that parents might face, let alone take time off from work or have to go up to the school or whatever the case may be.
I mean, so in theory, if the investigation or if the referral doesn't rise to the level of a CFSA investigation, like nothing should happen. The problem for the family is that they are fearful of prosecution for educational neglect. I mean, that's the concern. Like the families are scared. And, you know, when we're getting, in the instances where we're getting calls from families around the truancy in attendance, a lot of it is based on the fact that they got the letter and now they're scared and they don't know what to do. And I think that's enough of a concern.
Absolutely. I am willing to yield my time. I'm not sure, Representative Reid or Thompson, if those are current hands or those are up from before.
Mine's current.
Okay, Representative Reid, I will yield the remaining minute or so.
I just feel like it's always time to say thank you. Serena, your office, especially being a new board member, and then the start of the school year was tough for a lot of folks for a lot of reasons. And I appreciate it. I think when you noticed the stress, that reminder saying, like, you know, this office provides case management for families from start to finish. It was good to circle back with families because I'm a little protective and they were really, I am, because I believe in good customer service. And a lot of times it doesn't happen for families for a variety of reasons, and families felt connected. They at least knew that you were going to follow up. So it's just worth like just saying, thank you to your office for really, again, providing those end-to-end services. And then for anyone who is listening, please call the Office of Student Advocate, for one, to help get your problems kind of solved or addressed. But then we also can get this deep, rich data that talks about what are we seeing from our families. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A wonderful note to end on. Thank you, Ms. Hayes. This is really insightful, and we look forward to sharing more information with the public. With that, we are now going to switch gears to the Office of the Student Advocate, led by Chief Student Advocate Dan Davis, who too has been a vital resource for families in the district. And for those watching, I'm sure an inevitable question would be, well, how are these two offices separate? So, Mr. Davis, I'm going to ask that if somewhere in your presentation, you can just tee that up for those that are watching. I can't tell you how many times I get that question, but we too look forward to your presentation, your recommendations, and then we too will have a round of questions for you. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I want to make sure I remember last time I had some mic issues. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, great. John Paul is going to work the slides for me.
Coming up now, 1 second.
While we wait on the slide, Mr. Davis, so if a Ward 5 parent were to ask, how would you describe the work of the student advocate compared to the Ombudsman's office?
So I like to think the cleanest and easiest way to describe the difference between the student advocate office and the Ombudsman's office is like going to urgent care versus going to the ER. Our office is created to help families navigate the process and to get them from point A to B very quickly. And so we do that. We try to keep our engagements with families as directly and quickly completed as possible. The ombudsman, working with the ombudsman, Serena could jump in if this is wrong, but it is a much more intensive process. It's a case management process. It is a process where they're going to go through all of the steps to get you to a solution or a compromise that you're happy with. And I think Jean Paul, we're seeing the wrong screen.
I apologize. I'm having lots of technical issues. Give me one more second. I apologize.
I can try to share my screen and do it myself if that makes it easier.
Give me 1 second. I think I can pull it up again. It just closed. There we go.
Right. So we're going to jump a couple of slides. And good evening, President Parker, Vice President Gasoi, members of the DC State Board of Education, Dr. Grant, and staff. Thank you for this opportunity to present the 2021 annual report for the Office of the Student Advocate. My name is Dan Davis, and I lead the Office of the Student Advocate. Can we hop to slides, JP? One more. So in school year 2021, we focused on a myriad of issues, namely the safety of our students traveling to and from schools, parent-facing supports for successful virtual learning, engaging students and families online, and increasing access for students and families for behavioral health supports. Next slide.
Give me 1 second.
Our office is committed to increasing the level of safety students have in their daily commute. Last year, we released Safe Passage, a student's perspective report, highlighting experiences of traveling to and from school of 430 students from all 8 wards attending 27 traditional or charter campuses. Our report, produced in collaboration with the Urban Institute, noted several observations. 1, students have normalized incidents of violence, resulting with them accepting elevated levels of risk and potential danger. 2, students are hypervigilant about unknown adults who are often sources of violence, street harassment, and exposure to substance abuse. 3, students have adopted crowding or large peer group travel to increase their sense of safety and predictability. A full version of the report can be found online at studentadvocate.dc.gov. Next slide, please. We needed to be responsive and solution-focused for parents who are struggling with virtual instruction. Too many families who were unable to participate in hybrid or in-person learning last year were unaware of strategies embraced by families that had the means to augment virtual instruction with tutors or in-person aides. We sought to create access to an approach that would allow neighbors to cooperatively support each other and provide some resemblance of school-based social interaction for students. We launched up a podding guide that could help neighbors or community-based organizations set up learning pods without incurring the cost of a tutor or hired support. The guidebook reviewed topics from agreeing to shared health norms to daily checklists for schoolwork. Next slide. Last year, our conversations with families and school staff about virtual learning challenges too often circled back to learning roadblocks that emerged from shifting the classroom into the home. Too often, students would log on from class from their bed, instruction time overlapped into chore time, school supplies were stored with toys, and the list of distractions went on and on. We created a self-paced virtual learning toolkit for parents, in which parents were provided with the tools to create learning environments that mirror the classroom at home, from schedule setting to setting up learning spaces free of distractions. Next slide. As we all pivoted during the pandemic, our office shifted as well, becoming more present online. We became more intentional on how we use social media In the past, our postings was a vehicle to promote our programmatic activities, like connect with us on our request for assistance hotline, or join us for one of our workshops. We shifted to use the platforms as the venues for engagement and knowledge sharing. We produced campaigns that targeted students and families about the changes in school-based behavioral health programs, that shared resources on how to be a better ally for students who identified as trans, and how to navigate hybrid or virtual learning. We are continuing to use social media this school year to engage and educate students and families about the return to in-person instruction and how to exercise their rights, as well as returning to more in-person activities. Next slide. Supporting parents of students with disabilities is a commitment our office cannot walk away from. Last winter, it became clear that parents needed support with understanding how their IDEA rights to a free and appropriate public education would work in a virtual environment. We partnered with our sister office, the Ombudsman for Public Education and PAVE, to host a series of workshops that focus on how schools, LEAs, were managing their IDEA duties during virtual learning, and these workshops were also hosted in Spanish. Next slide. The expansion of the school-based behavioral health in the district is truly responsive to the needs of students, families, and educators. However, there's still a need to make this expansion more accessible for families and less stigmatizing for students. We launched an online toolkit for navigating behavioral health in schools in collaboration with DBH, GW's Milken School Public Health, DCPS, community-based service providers, and families of students who are consumers of behavioral health services. The purpose of the toolkit is to provide families, teachers, and students with pragmatic, foundational information regarding behavioral health and provide a starting point to use in seeking care and resources. Our work on behavioral health also led us to partner with DBH and OSSE's Coordinating Council on School Behavioral Health to help build a pathway for student voice during this expansion. This led to the recruitment of a student to fill the 2-year vacant student position on the Coordinating Council. Next slide. It's cool. I'm going to go into discussing our data. We're going to talk about our request for assistance in our hotline data and kind of the trends that we saw this year, last year. Next slide. Last school year, we supported 507 families through our request for assistance hotline, returning us to the level of service we were providing prior to the pandemic, and a 19% increase over our school year 2019-20 levels. Next slide. The top issue we supported families in school year 2021 were related to the public education concerns and policies. Through this category covers issues ranging from out-of-school discipline policies to not enough support provided in schools. An overwhelming amount of these calls were regarding the impact of district health policies related to COVID and how they affected school building operations, from record keeping, transcript requests to social distancing spacing. The next two highest topic areas were related to special education and enrollment access. These two issues have consistently trended high since our office opened in 2015. Next slide. We saw an increase related to special education services. Nearly 20% of the calls on our RFA line related to special education disability. Of those calls, the top 3 concerns were related to individual education plans, IEPs, not enough support provided, and academic supports. Next slide. Typically, parents were reaching out to our office looking for special education supports as it related to the quality of services connected to their IEPs, how their students' 504 plans accommodations will transition while virtual, and when in-person related services will resume. What do we resume? Delays with initiating and completing the evaluation process and change of placement notifications. Next slide. Enrollment access captures concerns and questions regarding the school choice and the lottery process, to revoking invitations and technology challenges. Nearly 20% of calls on the RFA line related to enrollment access calls. Next slide. Of those calls, the top three areas of concerns related to parents of students with disabilities seeking new schools, technology access such as device and online platform changes from Zoom, Aspen, Google Classroom, and introductions to the DC school choice process. Next slide. About 25% of the calls on the RFA line related to public education concerns and policies. These calls were related to public health policies, adoption of the Real ID policies, creating demand for transcript and documentation assistance. Next slide. And one more slide, please. More than 70% of our RFAs came from students and families being served by DCPS. About 37% of our RFAs were from students who attended their in-boundary school within DC, and 24% came from students who attended out-of-boundary school. Another 12% of those ECPS students were attending selective or citywide schools. About 1/5 of our total RFAs came from students attending one of the district's 60+ charters. Next slide. We served more students, we served more families and residents, more families who resided in Ward 8. About 32% of all our RFAs, slightly over half of all of our requests came from families east of the rivers in Ward 7 and 8, which is reflective of the equity challenges families in those communities are navigating in our current system of public education. And we're gonna move into our next slide, and we're gonna move into our recommendations. Our first recommendation has actually been, when we write these reports, we create these reports in August, and most of these actually recommendations have been adopted or being implemented or in some stage of being implementation. So, but I will go through. One of the things that we want to see happen is to adopt evidence-based practices for increasing student and family voice in our school-based behavioral health program. One, we want to institute peer specialists at the school level or within community-based organizations already operating within schools. Two, create a youth advisory council in collaboration with the DC Department of Behavioral Health. Three, create a parent leadership committee in collaboration with the DC Department of Behavioral Health. And four, hire and place school-based liaisons in high-need areas. These expanding these in the report, but I know I'm pushing on time, so we'll keep on going. Our next recommendation is increasing family. Next slide. The next recommendation is increasing our family and student voice in the engagement by expanding our community schools. One, we want to make sure our community schools are creating systems that foster autonomy and voice at the decision-making table for parents and amplifying Black and Brown parents' experiences with accessing high-quality learning in DC schools. So we want to make sure they hold space for regular conversations about the experiences of families, the school staff experience, and those of the service provider, and share that data in conversations to all partners. Three, we want families to be able to interpret data about family engagement with families and empower them on how to analyze and better use data collected to make more informed decisions about community school offerings. Four, we want to encourage schools to develop a plan of actions together with families on how to improve family engagement practices during the school year and implement better plans of actions. Next slide. Final recommendation is going to say true to safe passage, improving the safe passage of students traveling to and from school in the district. Our first recommendation is establishing a commission on safe passage that includes students and families to ensure that safe passage work is driven by their voice. Two, we want to redefine at the state level what safe travel to and from school is, what it looks like, and how students should experience it. Three, we want to create solutions to address street harassment in schools and in our communities. And four, ensure behavioral health resources are more accessible for students. Thank you for your time, and I'm willing to talk through the report. There's a lot more information on the recommendations in the actual report.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Members, are there questions? We'll do another round of 3 minutes. And first up, we have Representative O'Leary. You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. If you could go to the slides on the special education results. Could you just pick maybe one or two of those scenarios that you had and let us know what happened with that specific, I think that might have been it. Go back one, go up one. You have these scenarios of something happening. Can you tell me what the action was when that happened? Or is that possible?
Yeah, that's possible. So
Great.
I provided essentially vignettes of the typical calls that we received. Some of these are scenarios that we have, but they've been kind of stripped of identifying information. So, and
I mean, you can just do one of them. I just would like to see what the process was.
Okay. So I think in all of our processes, when we receive any type of complaint around social education, we could definitely connect with the school. So our first step was to connect with connect that parent and the principal together to begin that conversation. During that conversation around whether or not there was a delay in the evaluation process, and from the beginning of the RTI to the evaluation process, where the parent was saying there was challenges, you connected the parent back to the school coordinator, and was able to kind of reset. I think essentially in that situation, the delay, half of the delay was on the school and the staffing being available, and 2 on the parent making the student available.
Okay, and the one about the child with autism.
Right. So in this situation where the student was placed received a hybrid seat. So the student was already returning to school started to return to school earlier than other students last year. The challenge though was that the expectation of returning to school was not what was told to the parent. The parent expected to have a traditional classroom seat where they would, a traditional self-contained classroom seat where they would receive the same amount of service and the same amount of tactile support. This child, the parent was not satisfied with the quality of what was being offered in the school building. And so essentially what it was a conversation where we had to level set with the parent about what her expectations were and what the expectations of the school could provide.
And so what was the result?
They continued on in that classroom, in the hybrid classroom. I believe my understanding was that child got an extra day of instruction, but they were not provided a dedicated aide.
And so he didn't have a dedicated aide?
Correct.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Patterson.
Yes, thank you, President Parker and Mr. Davis. I really appreciate first and foremost your just unwavering support of safe passages and what you've done. I know way before it became the thing that everybody is talking about, and in the pandemic, you have been there working for literally years. And I totally agree with trying to find a definition of what safe passage means and trying to join some of the disjointed parts about that. So I want to get back to your proposal of doing a commission. What does that look like and how do we help?
Right. So essentially what we want with the commission is a commission that's comprised of students, guardians, education leaders, public safety professionals, and transportation stakeholders to, one, advise the mayor and the council on the investments that are needed for students. Too often we are very reactive to, we are well-intended and not necessarily listening to our students and our families who are the end users of our investment. We create programs and we create solutions for problems that students aren't experiencing or aren't priorities.
So if I could follow up on that, so where does that commission sit? You know, you have someone that's supposed to be in the deputy mayor's office that deals with safe passage. You now have legislation that is supposed to be, you know, kind of helping with violent interrupters. You got a lot of people doing a lot of different things, but none of the dots are being connected. How would they collaborate with those entities?
So I believe that it would sit similar to how we have other commissions set up, as for example, the Returning Citizen Commission, commission that's established, where, you know, a commission on men and father and boys, as well as commissions that are attached to the students in care. But all of those commissions are attached into the executive and to the mayor's office.
I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Thompson.
And always a pleasure and always impressive. I have a couple different questions. First question. So I know you said the majority of cases that you all handle were for 5, 7, and 8. Given we have the majority of families, was that number proportionate to like the number of families we have, or was it disproportionately, you know, people from, does that make sense? Like,
Mhm.
you said this is an indication of the equity, but like if it's in line with the amount of students we have, then,
So,
yeah,
right, so I would say it was not necessarily in line with the amount of students that we have.
yeah,
It's, it is more so reflective of those, it's more so reflective of the folks that are reaching out to our office that are able to navigate and make it to our space. Conversely, in that same graph, if you look at where schools are located and schools are being, where schools are being located and that we are connecting to, Ward 5 is leading that leading ward with around 25% of all calls for Ward 5 schools. And so part of tracking where students reside and making sure that we're putting services and we're putting efforts to meet students where they are, is making sure that we're matching proportionally the services. I'm struggling right now with speaking. Matching proportionally the services that are the population's base for Ward 7 and 8.
okay, I have a different question. I'm curious with, as you have done these reports over the years, and we think about our conversations around governance, if there are things that we should go back and revisit, like are there trends we're seeing year over year with how people are interacting with offices, or just people being confused about where to go, if those are more heavily weighted to particular offices? Because I'm sure that you all are doing a bit of triaging, given your urgent care and emergency statuses over there in your offices. So I'm curious if things you would lift up as like just trends year over year.
So I think this is a trend that's probably been true for several years. I think one of the byproducts of our system of robust school choice has kind of pushed all of parents' agency into school choice. The seat at the table and the decision-making model is kind of, for lack of a better reason, for parents ends at when they choose a school. And that's created these shock waves in other areas. And so I think one of the things that we see a lot is for kind of for parents trying to navigate choice during the middle of the school year, instead of trying to resolve school problems. Instead of trying to sit down at the table and talk to school leaders, talk to principals or teachers, they're very quick to just say, okay, this isn't working, I'm on to the next school. And that is, I think we all know families that have been in 5 different LEAs in 4+ years. And so that is one of the things where I think, as we become more intentional about the conversation around governance, we should be more intentional around the conversation about building out what we want our school choice to look like moving forward, and how we can do that in a comprehensive way.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate that. I have a third question. I am out of time.
I'm confident somebody will yield some time. For the sake, here, I'll yield my time for the sake of continuity. So feel free to go.
Thank you. Last question. You noted community schools in your presentation. I'm curious if there's a definition that you, or a standard you have for community schools, because I see a lot of stuff labeled as community schools.
So I'm using community schools in the broadest sense, be it community schools, connected schools, schools, whatever the phrasing is. I'm speaking specifically to the model where we are putting services in school buildings that are supposed to be supportive of the student population in those families. Part of that conversation around, I guess, equity and kind of determining and empowering parents is making sure when we do put resources in school buildings, that we're putting resources in school buildings that are reflective of what parents want, or what they actually want, and kind of what they are vocalizing as their needs. Too often we kind of jump the gun and say, okay, we know what parents need, we know the solutions, and this is the model, and these are the services that are going to be offered, versus sitting down at the table and listening to the expertise and yielding to that lived experience of parents and folks in the community.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. And my oven is letting me know my salmon is ready.
Thank you. I'm going to reclaim my time, so I'll come back to that. Vice President Gasoi.
Thank you. And thank you for this report and for all of the work that you do. Actually, my question was about the community schools as well. And one of the things that I have understood about it is that for both the community schools and the connected schools, it involves having a full-time coordinator at the school to sort of address some of the issues you've mentioned, Mr. Davis, around like making sure that whatever services are going in are connected to what the school actually needs. I guess my question then is, what is the recommendation? Is it to expand what's already happening through OSSI and DCPS? Because I think there's like a timeline of like expansion already, right? I think.
Right.
So are you recommending to increase that or to change something about it? And is it one of the initiatives that's in process? So that's my question.
So my recommendation is, yes, is to continue the increase and continue that expansion, but to be more intentional about to be more intentional around the process of what we put in school buildings. I think what you said is that you described it completely accurate. There's a point person, a community school coordinator, a person that's in charge with making sure that these programs are put into the school. But too often those are conversations between school leadership and that person, not necessarily that person and students and parents.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So what is the thought, how will you address that? Is it a conversation with like the community schools folks at DCPS and at OSSI, or is it working with the coordinators or something else?
It's working with coordinators, but it's also just ingraining into the model that ingraining into the model, a seat at the table during this decision-making process for families.
That's great. Thank you. I have one more quick question was not in the report, which is, I know in the past you and Ms. Hayes have talked about wanting to increase the volume of limited English speakers who call. And I was just wondering if there has been an increase in that, or if you've tracked that this past year.
So we have tracked that. We are continuing to struggle to meet the mark and to reach a level that is kind of reflective of the populations of students that are in our school system. I think this past year we put more investments into connecting with English language learners, from Spanish language radio ads, advertisements, and Spanish language newspapers, to hosting bilingual workshops. In addition to that, also making sure all of our kind of printed material and social media material is also available in Spanish and in Amharic.
Thank you. Okay, we'll figure out how to be helpful with that. So, yeah.
Thank you. Representative Wattenberg.
Hi, thanks again. Terrific report. So interesting. My question, it's possible I should have asked it as much to our ombudsman, but it's really about both in the pandemic year and now coming out of it. It's at the same time that there has been much more attention in the city to the need to provide early reading screenings to students. We now have rules, I think they go into effect next year, that will require a screening in every at the beginning of every year for every, I think, first and second grader, kindergarten. Can you say anything about how that is playing out? I mean, do you see more interest in it, more understanding of it, more efforts at the school level to try to deal with this, et cetera?
So I guess what I've seen, what we see most, I'll speak for myself, I can't speak for Serena and Ms. Hayes. what we see from our office is one, more families being aware of the law, being aware of what's coming down the pike, and needing some clarity about when things will be in place, when things will kind of kick in. I think there's a lot of families, a lot of parents that are eager to kind of get going with some of the interventions and get going with some of the assessments and those tools. But currently not all of the LEAs, or I should say not all of the campuses have folks that are geared and trained in those interventions. I would say more recently this year, we've had more conversations with families or schools and LEA reps that they are working towards that and they're getting folks trained, but there's still a gap between what the need is and kind of what's being demanded.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to hearing from you as this goes into implementation and we see how it's playing out. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Reid.
I get the rest of Ruth's minute. I got a few things. So first, Dan, thank you so much. Again, always good time to say thank you. A lot of times in regards to community issues, thinking about kids will be back in school during the summer, you were already like, these are the agencies that are engaged, their planning already happening. You were always ahead of it versus responsive to it. So thank you. All right. I think for SBOE, like we might need to use some retreat time. I'm not sure we have another retreat to unpack both reports. That's a suggestion, not really for you, Dan, but that's for leadership. I really love the recommendations. Something for parent engagement to think about, and I've been pondering too, in regards to your recommendation, because we have, like, if parents have multiple children across town, variety of schools, I'm almost thinking like, is there a ward, could be like ward level engagement or some entity or some way to do it, because I think right now we do parent engagement specific to schools, but sometimes one parent or two parents can't, or, extended family can't be at each school and they might want to engage, but just because of the nature of our system, I don't know if somebody can catch that. But in regards to like, how do we engage with parents when we have so much choice and variety and students can end up anyway? So I'll let whatever in your report, that's a pondering piece, not really something or response. For safe passage, I'm thinking, how do we chunk, because it's such big work, chunk safe passage into like next steps. And I do like you highlighted, like, if we identify, what does it mean? But I'm also thinking like, how do we chunk or divide the work so that we know we're actually making progress in relation to safe passage, and this is something, again, multi-agency. RTI, the way it was described, is something that we might, again, as a city or possibly OSSI, look at. I feel like in that example, we didn't use RTI correctly. And that's why the parent was worried about when evaluation was happening. But that's something else. All right, lastly, the thing that I do want you to respond to, I was thinking and writing things down. Your lottery example on that slide, can you pull that back up? I guess is what I'll use my 48 seconds for. You gave an example about the lottery, but it kind of flew through it. Yeah. And something while you're getting it up, I'm pointing that out. Knowing all the kind of disparities in relation to like the lottery is a big process based on computers. And I've had a few families who missed out on their choice school because of the nature of the quick response. So I wanted to see, okay, homeless. Yes, could you explain this? Or what came out of that? Because that's what I've experienced too.
Yeah, so I think for this family, it was part of their challenge was that they were new to DC. They weren't, they weren't familiar with the way the My School DC lottery works. They weren't familiar with, kind of the school being across the street, not necessarily being their in-boundary neighborhood school. And for us, part of that challenge was to kind of help that family and help that school navigate what this situation was. They were a situation where they were it was a doubling up situation. And they did not have all the documents that were kind of needed to start if they were going through the traditional process. but they have McKinney-Vento protections. So for us, it was just kind of just holding that family's hand through the process, and making sure, I think there was three schools for this one family that just needed for us to kind of put that gentle touch in, saying, hey, this is their situation, this is what they have, what can we do to get them started? Most of those schools were able to kind of make those accommodations and adjust once they became aware of the situation.
Yeah, I encourage us to look at my school DC lottery as we're going into another school year, especially when it comes to the choice part, because it's an element of getting all the paperwork, even for families who may or may not be experiencing homelessness, getting all the paperwork, getting things in time and making that decision within the 30 days before they run out of their seat. And we knew there was a lot of empty seats going into this school year that we didn't take advantage of. So as we're continuing to get back into more in-person learning, that process, can we make it a little more friendly for families? But that's it. Thank you.
You, Representative Reid, and thank you, Representative Wattenberg, for yielding the remainder of your time. Representative Sutter.
Thanks. I'll actually pick up where Representative Reid left off about the question on working on the lottery. How often does the Office of the Student Advocate handle things with families alone versus like work with my school DC so that there's interagency improvement of processes?
So I think we try to work with as many partners as possible. We have some, my school DC is a great partner for us. We talk to them a lot around what's kind of available, what can we do to kind of move things forward, as well as the DCPS enrollment team as well. But as far as, I guess all of the education stakeholders, I think we are one of those folks that try to play nice in the sandbox. So, if we can engage and reach out and, get to a solution with somebody, we will pretty much hold their hand and figure it out.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dan. And I think that's wonderful. I'm also hopeful that results in, to Dr. Reid's point, some changes in the My School DC process to make things easier for families who are experiencing homelessness or unsettled addresses as we get back to more in-person learning.
Right, and I think to speak to Dr. Reid's situation, part of that was kind of, her not saying that she was homeless. It was one of those things that came out during our conversation. It was just like, this is where I'm staying, and us being able to figure out, okay, you are technically homeless for educational purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. So my other question is to go back to community schools, because I like this solution a lot, this idea of improving community schools. And I'll say one thing I'm curious about whether the Office of the Student Advocate has a perspective on. I've gotten the chance to visit a bunch of the community schools in Ward 6, and they vary a lot in the way they do their work. So as Vice President Gasoi noted, there's a school-based coordinator, but in some schools that school-based coordinator is deeply embedded in the administrative team of the school. And in others, they function more like a school partner. So they're not internal to the school. They're treated more like a coordinator of external partners. Do you all have a perspective on best practices of community schools that you think would lead to the kinds of things that you want to accomplish here with like really giving parents a seat at the table on school-based decision-making?
To be perfectly honest and frank about it, our whole recommendation is based on creating space in the model of community schools. So it's not just reliant on the community school coordinator or the administration on what happens to that community school model and what happens with those partners. Our model is trying to, I guess, push more effort and push more weight to parents to kind of be able at the table to demand and say, these are the service providers that work for me. These are the service providers that I would want to see. These are the services that we think we need or that we think we need that will make us more successful versus, the other way where it may get, them being informed of decisions after.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you so much for the work you and your team do for our families all the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Very insightful. And we look forward to sharing this report as well with the public. And thank you for being here with us. Members, we are going to now switch gears for our public comment. We, as you know, at every meeting, entertain testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. And for members of the public, your comments become part of our official record. If you would like to speak at a future public meeting, you can sign up at our website or visit or write at sboe.dc.gov. You can also contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov. Tonight, we will hear from 4 public witnesses, although I think it is down to 3 public witnesses since I last checked, including those who have submitted written testimony. We will be holding to a strict time limit of 3 minutes for our witnesses. While you speak, there will be a timer on your screen. If you set your view to gallery mode, after the witnesses speak, members will have an opportunity to ask questions. Members will have 2 minutes. That will include your question and the answer from those providing testimony. With that, Mr. Hayworth, you may begin by calling up our public witnesses for the evening.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll begin tonight with Ms. Reilly.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. I came to talk about the star rating. I'm going to start with a quote from Houston and Jeff Hennig. When we inaccurately attribute differences in educational quality to school districts because of the students they serve or school systems, rather than their effectiveness in serving those students, we shortchange both district and student, or both school and student. So I'm just going to read off some points. Just to be brief, I strongly agree that bias is an issue, as you have noted. The current report card strongly favors schools serving students who arrive with a higher level of proficiency. If we're going to call this a report card, it should reflect what the school actually has control over. I have heard in every setting that we do not want summative rating. We don't want the stars, and so I would strongly prefer a dashboard. I question the weight of the PARCC scores as a fair measure. Only one state currently uses that test. Growth is not computed with the same students or even in the high schools at all, and the percentages should thus be reduced. OSSE should have additional indicators and information. The Illinois school report cards, for example, have a lot of information in an easy to access format. These indicators that we should develop should include a measure for a well-rounded education, which I attached one, which we worked on last time. We should expand the school highlights section also. The Illinois school report card also provides context and information on different measures. In particular, I'm concerned with the per pupil expenditure. The overall average number includes funds that are designated for particular students, like smaller teacher-student ratios for SPED and ELL, and these funds are actually not available for all students. At the very least, they should be explained if this figure is displayed. I'm concerned about attendance and how it's measured and weighted, given that we actually want students to stay home if they're sick, if they have something contagious, and they may not need a doctor's note to do that. If the high school format continues to be used, I strongly urge that NAF and CTE participation be added to the IB AP participation rates. Our schools are very different, so I don't think a simple comparison is fair or appropriate. It'd be far better if the district is supporting choice to pose questions for consideration like distance from home, program that aligns with child's interests. Urge families to visit or look at a school website, talk to parents from different schools. I don't think we want to maximize people switching schools, and the way that we introduce this might have an impact on that. Most important is that we don't reduce schools or students to too few indicators. The full school experience is far more important than any one indicator. Therefore, academics, programs, environment, health and safety, and resources are all important to be fairly described without a huge emphasis on one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fuchs.
Great. Thank you. So I'm here to testify today because I'm asking you to lobby your council members to oppose the confirmation of Dr. Christina Grant, to send a message to the mayor that blatant disrespect of the public and the DC State Board of Education has to end. Once again, Mayor Bowser has chosen a political appointee with ties to the Eli Road Foundation, who will be highly unlikely to hold schools accountable to the federal law will further the goals of privatization of our public schools. We can see it in the very people who showed up to testify in favor of Dr. Grant, and they're all from the same camp. Education Reform Now and DEFR, the Walton Family Foundation, City Bridge and Catherine Bradley, Federal City Council, Bloomberg, a whole bunch of charter schools and their lobbyists. From everything I've heard, I see someone who has a legacy with a legacy of privatization instead of a legacy of building up public schools. It is time to send the mayor a message. OSSI needs to stop treating the SBOE as a joke. We need to see a stronger attempts at holding them accountable. No longer serving as a rubber stamp, no longer just allowing a 2 to 5 minute report and not getting public questions and answers on the record. Let's be real. Has ever having a nice relationship with them improved the information or input that you can give? I doubt it. And if you feel that it has, I'm certainly not seeing any positive effects from it. I'm tired of political grifters and their lobbyist friends who are on some billionaire education privatizer shortlist, getting an important job and then using it to further the mayor's political goals. I hope that the SBOE can do whatever they can to help Dr. Grant be more effective, since we know she'll probably get unanimously confirmed, and that she'll be more transparent and independent than her predecessors. We need leaders who are champions for neighborhood public schools as the backbone of the entire system of choice, and who views educator critiques and whistleblowers as honest stakeholders who want to improve the system for the benefit of all our students. We want people at OSSI who don't just take the word of DCPS Central Office and the DC Public Charter School Board and put out press releases about how we're the fastest growing school district in the nation. We need you to be our champions with OSSI to get them to be better than they have been. And if you're listening, Acting OSSI Superintendent Christina Grant, as the leader of OSSI, you must work closely with those who are actually tasked with implementing our most important education policies, those who serve in our schools. Your predecessors and most of the people working in your office did not and do not do this. You must hold charter and DC public schools equally accountable and not just rely on a politically biased public charter school board and DCP Central Office to tell you the truth about what is going on in their schools, especially around special education and English language learners who are protected by federal law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I believe that's the end of our public witnesses for this evening.
Thank you. And then there were two members. Please raise your hand if you have questions for our panelists. First up, Representative Sutter.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Reilly and Ms. Fuchs for coming tonight. Ms. Reilly, I wanted to turn my question to you. I read the paper, the Houston and Hennig paper that I've seen a few folks post about, and I think it's a fascinating paper. I put it in our meeting chat for my colleagues. One of the things I think is most interesting about it is that in their conclusion, the authors note that their experiment had been to offer families just information on student growth as a means of helping them better choose a school, because status, as they call it, or student achievement only, tends to skew racially and ethnically biased based on what we know about test scores of performance and schools. They note, though, in the conclusion that it would be irresponsible to only offer parents information on growth and not on performance. And so systems that do that are unlikely to happen. They note that school evaluations have to be multidimensional, and they note that there needs to be more of an effort to educate families on how to use the data to choose their schools. So my question is, as you think about changes to the STAR rating, is it more important that we change the content of what is in the STAR report? Is it more important that we change the weight of what's in the STAR report? Or is it more important that we educate families on how to better use the information? Or is it all three?
I guess it might be all three, but I think we really need to change the content and the weights. That we've learned a lot since you first approved it. And I guess what happens to me is the schools that I know really well, when I read the school report card, it doesn't capture what they offer. And that feels really frustrating. And I do think, certainly that report, as you noted, qualifies a lot of what they say. It gives it an example of why it's really hard to just use research, without some qualitative and other measures. So as I said, I think it's really important that we stop trying to help families constantly change schools, and we start trying to help them excuse me, choose the right school to begin with, because all the changing is really hurt the kids. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
No, it's very helpful. Thank you so much, Ms. Reilly. My time's up.
Representative Reid.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Reilly and Ms. Fuchs, you can equally split time for this this question. But a question that stuck with me from the confirmation hearing is about accountability of the superintendent. So between the two of you, this is a question from Robert White, actually, that sticks with me. What does accountability look like? And I'll split it between two things for superintendent in the current system that we have. And then what could accountability look like if we had a different system? Just either of you want to.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that there's no evaluation. Like, what's the point after 1 year that you actually have an evaluation instrument in either system where you walk through the points and say, did you do this? How closely did you work with the board? How many public meetings? Like, if the council, before they approved a superintendent said, this is what we expect for you. It's a high salary. It's a big responsible job. Did you accomplish these things? So I guess we don't do that. All of the teachers, all the principals, everybody else has this pretty stiff accountability system. And the people at the top don't.
I mean, I guess I was just thinking, like, they don't hold DCPS and the public charter schools accountable to the federal laws that they're supposed to do. So, like, what does accountability even look like from their angle? Like, I've filed several state complaints this year now for the first time, but like, I hadn't really been informed that was an option for me. And I think most teachers didn't, right? Like, what are they doing to get to the teachers and the people who could actually tell the truth and have a reason to tell the truth, unlike the people who lead us have every reason to hide things. And OSSI has proven repeatedly that they're willing to hide them for the mayor as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Patterson.
Yes, thank you both for coming tonight. I really appreciate both of you guys' testimony, Ms. Reilly and Ms. Fuchs. I wanted to direct my question toward Ms. Reilly. Because I'm working on the STAR report card. I just wanted to dig in a little bit more about, first I want to ask just point blank, do you think attendance should actually be one of the metrics that is on the STAR report card? And give me your justification either way.
Well, I just, I find with a lot of the metrics that unless they're qualified a little bit, like I said, if you just say, one school has 100% attendance, and in this context, I always felt uncomfortable with this, that you have to have children stay home if they're sick. And right now, the bar to have an excused absence is too high. So if you want to use attendance, then you have to lower the bar and you have to make it, work for our health. So, but if you use attendance the way it's used now, where a parent has to get a doctor's note in order for it to be an excused attendance, then I think we're hurting ourselves. So I don't know if that answers your question. I'm mixed about it. Attendance is important. And I think, but I do think it puts some schools at a disadvantage.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think there needs to be something done around that. So I truly appreciate your answer. And I'll follow up very quickly with the last 40 seconds that I have. Because you said the magical word to me, which is qualitative. Do you believe that we should have some type of qualitative surveys to be part of that framework, and how having parents, students, and maybe teachers weighing in to give the full story?
I do. I mean, I think you have to get a really good survey, and it has to be administered well. But I think that would give you a good measure to have, and it give the parents and the teachers and the students an opportunity to say what the school is for them. I do want some qualitative measures.
I do too as well. Thank you so much for your answers.
Next up is Representative O'Leary.
Yes, I have a question for Ms. Reilly about the evaluation system, since the PARCC test is only given in one state. So there are 49 states. We're not that one state, are we?
No, it's Illinois.
Okay.
We're a district.
Okay, so I just want to make sure. So what do they use for an evaluation system? The overwhelming majority of the states in the United States.
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but the sense I have is that they have, in this interim, they have created instruments that are more that more match and feel better to their population. A lot of them use certain questions from the park, but they try to align it with their curriculum or with what the students are learning. I mean, I don't know,
But
I don't know what they all use.
Does SI have a metric for the evaluation system?
No, I
Because they're
think
all
they, I
having
mean,
to
I
follow
think,
the ESSA rules.
right, but I think they allow the state to choose their metric, to choose their test. But, some of your people on your STAR committee might be able to better answer that.
Right. No, I understand that, but I just sort of getting it out into the ether and also, when are we, I mean, I don't think we should not have an evaluation system. I think it's very important, but I think it needs to be tailored to the District of Columbia rather than to the College Board or ETS or whatever.
Well, I think that you all approved the test. I think that is, I think there has to be.
It was approved.
No, you don't. So anyway, that process.
No, we don't approve.
You don't get to have anything to do with it. Well, I think the rest of us out here in the public, we should start pushing for a better measure.
That's why I asked the question. Thank you very much.
Right. The one we have is doesn't work anymore the same way.
Next is Representative Thompson.
Good evening. Happy to see you as our two testimonies for this evening. My question is for both of you. When we think about the STAR framework, I'm clear that a dashboard is encouraged. I'm clear people want a fuller sense of the story. I'm clear growth is important. I think what I'm not clear on, and I would lean on your expertise as people very involved in high schools, is if there are particular measures like, I don't know, SEL stuff that you think need to be developed to complement what we measure. So like I heard during the confirmation hearing that Superintendent Grant was like, we don't have SEL standards as a district. That seems like a big hole to me. But I'm curious if there are places where we should be building things to measure because we focus so much on test scores.
Just briefly, and then Cathy can say more, but like I want to measure inputs because basically what's measured in DC is what everyone's going to focus on. That's all they do. If we make a bunch of standards, there's just going to be some BS thing that I'm going to have to do to meet the standards. Like it's all just going to be fake because that's all DC understands is how to be fake. So like, I want to know like social workers per student, right? Like number of counselors per student, like, or the caseloads, right? Like I want things that like would then force DCPS to invest in our schools rather than forcing us to like meet some random, likely arbitrary, likely contracted out to someone I don't like standard, because that's what they're going to do.
Hey, can I give Cathy my last 10? I'm going to call it 10 seconds. Like it's
yeah, I guess the thing, because it's not the district that's held responsible, it's each school, that I agree with you that there should be standards on SEL. And that's why I also put in there CTE and NAF participation, because I think what we want is the sense that the students are moving toward adult life and they're being well supported. And the test score doesn't really indicate that, nor does just college going rates or that. So I'd be happy to talk to you more about what other standards we could push for the high schools. Not standards, but things that are metrics that will mean they actually happen.
Thank you.
Vice President Gasoi.
I think, did Representative Wattenberg go already? I think she's before me.
I missed her hand. Representative Wattenberg.
Hi, thank you both so much for coming. I'm gonna start with Cathy on the rating, and then if Ms. Fuchs wants to get in on the rating as well. So you mentioned the Illinois framework, the Illinois report card. Could you say something about what's on that you particularly like? Why you picked that one out?
Well, when I went on it with, I didn't like the summative rating about it, but what I liked is whenever you pushed on a button and you got that, whether it was academic or whatever, you got a context with it. You got an explanation that was clear and went into enough detail to you, Ms. Sutter, to qualify it a little bit and make it more clear. So I like that about it. I like that they had so many different things. I mean, I didn't study it to give you a list, but what I felt it gave a much fuller picture of a school. Instead of just lists, it had ways that you could see a lot of things. It had their athletics, not just a list on the first page. It said they had certain things that you kind of gloss over, but it made it come out at you. It actually made the school feel more full to me. It wasn't just numbers. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. Laura, do you want to get to some measures that you'd like to see? And I think the breadth of measures is what impressed me.
Thank you.
I don't know much, but about like what other school districts do, but what I do know is I don't like seeing everything reduced to oversimplified, stars or a letter grade or a percentage or some tiered thing where we're pitting schools against each other. Like, to me, that just doesn't make any sense because everyone has their own things that they care about. So make things comparable, but to like force on them like kind of an arbitrary standard is just, I just don't get it.
I like that it wasn't about comparisons.
On Monday night, we had our engagements, and one of the sessions was around the star rating, and we talked to people about different ways that we might change it. And one of the things that did come up was, the importance of trying to convey, as you say, sort of a story, to provide the context. So I think that's an important piece to include. And part of what I think we'll be grappling with is, am I out of time?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you guys. Can I say one thing, please? Just an announcement.
All right. Please use the chat.
Could someone cede me 15 seconds?
Until they do, use the chat. Vice President Gasoi.
No, but I want everybody else can see it.
You can have 15 seconds of my time. Go.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that the Assessment and Accountability Committee is planning to have recommendations for ways to improve the STAR system available in early December, and we'll be presenting them at our December public meeting. I think it's December 15th. So we invite you guys and everybody else to come comment on them then. We'll be able to use that input, and we are hoping to vote on them in January. That's it. Thank you, Ms. Gasoi.
Thank
you. Can keep going because actually Rep Lopez gave you her time. Do you want to ask another question or say more? Representative Lopez gave you her time.
Oh no, I was fine. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Representative Lopez.
Can I have my full time now?
Thank you, Vice President Gasoi.
Thank you. And thank you both for being here and for your testimony. I appreciate you both. And my question is also about the STAR rating and some of the work we're doing and what we're thinking about. One of the things I am grappling with is I think that changing or moving away from the STAR system is a good step because, first of all, I think it obscures what it is we're looking at, right? So I think it would be a step in the right direction to go to a dashboard because then at least you know what you're looking at or what's being evaluated. Then I sort of grapple with Campbell's law, right? Like, how do you keep, if you do have like a survey for, environment, how do you keep that from being sort of, like you have a pizza party on the day that parents are going to fill it out, or I don't know, like there's ways that you can game the system once it becomes used in that way. So I just wondered if you had thoughts about how to mitigate that, or if it's possible to do that.
It's a whole science, but I'll say for the most part, when people fill out surveys, they're more inclined to fill it out to put the negative things down. The people who feel positive don't fill them out. So I think if we go to that, it'll take a lot of work to get it right. And because we tried it at different times at different schools I've been on, and it's hard. So I don't say it lightly, but usually the pizza party doesn't do it. The people that put the energy into it are the people that have complaints. And so what
Can
you
I-
want to do is actually make sure you get the whole thing.
Can I just add, as someone who gets evaluated using student surveys, they get tired of taking them. They're extremely long. My kids literally put random stuff down and do it in 10 minutes, which is a little frustrating when I'm witnessing them do it and my job's on the line. And I try to beg them to stop, but if it's like the fourth period and they've taken them 4 periods in a row, they are done. So like,
Yeah.
we do have to really look at like what we're giving to kids. Is it developmentally appropriate? How many of these things have they had to do? Because like, my stuff is just totally invalid most of the time because they are just straight picking a number. They are not reading the questions. They are tired of doing all these different 200 question surveys because they're so long.
Right. So you're saying it's the opposite problem we should be worrying about, but it's still something we should be worried about or we should consider.
Important, but like we have to think of things in context, and kids are getting all these different surveys and all these different tests, and like it feels like another test to them in a lot of ways, right? Because here they're just always on the computer filling out things, and like they know it's meaningful, like they try, but like then they're on like question 30 and they're done trying. Even for me, they're just like, nope, here it goes, and they just start clicking things to be done with it. And like I get it, because I wouldn't want to answer that many questions either. There's so many questions. So it's like, we just have to be really smart and try to like get our ecosystem more manageable for our students and like spread things out and do things in a way that like doesn't just overload them and be like, I just took Park, I just took ANET, I just took this math thing, I just took AP, and now I'm about to take this survey and I hate everything. And here it goes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Chang.
Thank you. So at the first expert panel we had on accountability this year, I asked, who is the most important audience for our accountability work? And the response was administrators, not parents. And at our last expert panel, I asked the same question and the response was parents, not administrators. And I'm curious, I'd appreciate your take on this question. For whom are we and should we be designing our accountability systems?
Well, ideally, they would be for the people that you're holding accountable, that it would give them the information that they need to get better without it being a slap on the wrist or a crown. You know, that it's a working document and that your goal is to help people, help the world know what a great place it is, because all our schools really have a lot to offer, and also show the things that are going well and the things that we're all working on to get better. But I think if you pick one audience, it should feel fair to the people that are being accounted for, or however you look at it. That's the main thing. They have to feel that this fairly represents them. Laura?
Well, I think that that's part of the problem, right? Like that it's trying to be used for both, and it is currently not working probably for either, honestly. So I do think, right, like we want something usable for both parties, or we just have to pick what it's for and then like accept what it's not for. So like if it is just to inform parents, then maybe it isn't supposed to be the big growth tool that we have to obsess over. If it is the big growth tool we're supposed to obsess over, then maybe we need something else for parents. Like that, it just might not be appropriate to try and do both all the time with this one tool.
Thank you.
Representative Sutter, I will yield my time.
Thank you, President Parker. I love where this conversation is, and I want to ask this question. So, Ms. Reilly, you just said that one of the things you hope the tool would do is be useful for the folks who are being evaluated on it. And I want to ask that question then to Ms. Fuchs. You noted that you would like to see more inputs included in the system. How do you reconcile that with Ms. Reilly's hope that the system would help a school improve? Like if we're saying, does the school have arts and music? And the report says it does not have arts or music. How does that help the school improve?
I mean, because we can't like offer things to the kids. I guess like to me, that's part of like our problem is that like, it's hard for a Woodson to improve when we're so hyper focused on a few like barest common denominators, right? Like we are obsessed with attendance and we're obsessed with park and maybe the SAT. So like, that's a very narrow thing to be obsessed with. And it's not that attendance isn't important, but like, it just kind of leads to gamesmanship, right? Like which kids can we like make sure, you know, have been gotten? Like, let's focus on the bubble kids in this test. So like, there's too much gaming. And if we know that this is a system where people are going to game, I'd rather they game, how can I get an art teacher in this school? How can I make sure they have a theater program? How can I make sure like they've got band and things that kids actually want, rather than obsessing about these 10 kids that if we just move them to like the next park level, suddenly our school becomes 2 stars instead of 1.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is you don't hold the district accountable for giving them the resources to offer. And so it's all an outputs thing. It's not what's been inputted. You know, and that does really concern me. And, you know, it does give the parents the opportunity to advocate for it, but it doesn't show the cause. So that, you know, I think you have to really look at that in terms of the inputs. You know, it looks like the inputs is just supposed to be that average student expenditure, but you have to figure out a way to hold districts or school systems accountable too.
Thank you both so much. It was nice to have this conversation with a small group.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us. Intriguing conversation, and we will follow up. I would just say I didn't get a chance to ask questions, but I did just note that this idea of having a public framework that would hold the system or the superintendent by extension of the system is an intriguing idea. So thank you all again for your thoughtful questions and the discussion. We are now moving right along through our meeting. Next up, we will entertain a number of votes on ceremonial resolutions. We have one recognizing the achievement of Johnson Middle School football team. And Dr. Reid, would you like to make a motion, or this motion in particular?
Yes, I move that we approve the ceremonial resolution recognizing the Johnson Middle School football team.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. Is there a discussion on the, well, actually, before we entertain discussion, Mr. Hayworth, can you read the resolution into the record?
State Board of Education ceremonial resolution recognizing the 2021 Johnson Middle School football team, CR 21-25. Whereas the District of Columbia Interscholastic Athletic Association provides and supports a comprehensive athletic program for all District of Columbia public school students in grades 4 through 12. Whereas on November 10th, 2021, the John Hayden Johnson Middle School football team claimed victory over the Stephen E. Kramer Middle School 40-0 at the DCIAA Middle School Football Championship. Whereas the Johnson Panthers are now 7-time DCIAA champions, having previously won in 2004, 2005, 2006, 2010, 2017, and 2019, whereas the team has a cumulative record of 146 wins to 24 losses, and whereas the Johnson Panthers have exemplified the qualities of excellent student athletes and have brought pride to their Ward 8 community through their hard work and accomplishments. Now therefore be it resolved that the DC State Board of Education recognizes and congratulates the dedication and hard work of the student athletes, coaches, parents, and school administrators of the John Hayden Johnson Middle School Panthers on this occasion of their 2021 DCIAA championship victory.
Members, is there a discussion?
One of the flaws of virtual meetings.
One second, Representative O'Leary. Representative Reid, and then I'll come to you, Representative.
I'm sorry. Considers the discussion.
I mean, it is his birthday. So yes, thank you. To staff for pulling this together pretty quickly. For the simple fact that, you know, these championships, they happen. But I want to say I am upset with you all because on Wednesdays is usually when our middle schoolers play. And I've been hanging out with you all every Wednesday and have not been able to see Johnson play. However, I follow on social media, and the first inkling about this legacy that is Johnson's football, and with the coach having over 120 wins across a variety of seasons, was actually from the president of the PTO. And it's not just about wins, it's always been about character. It's always been about the parents rallying and making sure these students have everything they need. I also want to put a plug. These young men or individuals will be traveling, I believe, to a tournament somewhere out in Florida. So if folks want to connect with Coach Mike to make sure that happens for our students, I just really want to press that this is not just an athletic program, but it's really a character building program. And I really wanted to make sure that we recognize these young individuals. As you know, during the pandemic, Johnson was in the news for a variety of things, but these are the opportunities that don't hit the media when we have a legacy of excellence. And so I wanted to make sure that we recognize the coaches, we recognize the student athletes, we recognize the parents that make sure that they get there. We recognize the community members who fill in the gap sometimes when parents can't get there. Also got to push these young men. Talking about facilities, these young men practice on a field that has no lights. We want to talk about equity in our city. We need to make sure that Johnson football players with over 7 championships or with 7 championships gets lights on the field that they practice in. That would be equity to me. So yes, I want to take time to just make sure that we acknowledge the administrators. We have a new principal at Johnson this year who made sure that legacy continued, and just expanded upon, I believe, some of the sports options. We have the volleyball team who is going to the championship. We have the archery team who I believe they're going to too if they haven't already won it. It's a variety of wonderful things happening in our Ward 8 schools, and I just want to plug it, but not just happening, it's a legacy of excellence that sometimes gets overlooked. So kudos to Coach Mike, kudos to Johnson Middle School and the community members that make it happen on a regular basis. Much appreciated. And thank you again to staff members for pulling this together.
Thank you. Representative O'Leary.
As I was saying, one of the things that we do lose from being virtual is being able to have the teams come and get their pictures taken with the State Board of Education. And that's a big deal for the players. As a coach for over 40 years, who never won a championship, I know that it's a big deal. We played for a couple. As a matter of fact, this weekend, Coolidge from Ward 4 will be playing for the Stripes Division Championship against Bell from Ward 1. And next Thursday at the Turkey Bowl, Woodson will be playing against Roosevelt from Ward 4 for the Turkey Bowl Championship. And so I hope that with the new mask mandate that the mayor has or gotten rid of the mandate, we'll be able to celebrate the wins of the 2 Ward 4 football teams when they win the 2 championships live, maybe at our next meeting, if that's possible. But congratulations to all of the athletes that participate in championships, not just the winners, but the people that make it to the championships. That's a big deal for all athletes, both male and female.
Absolutely. With that and not seeing other comment, Mr. Hayworth, can you please call the roll?
Rep O'Sullivan has a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And Campbell.
Thank you, President Parker, and thank you, Representative Thompson. I just wanted to add on really quickly. I think it's great we're doing this ceremonial resolution. I'm a big football fan, so I can appreciate what it can definitely mean. Never played on a football team though, and also just to say in general, like I think the impact that sports can have on young people's lives is something we should always continue to really value. Because I also think it's something that really can do a lot for students' mental health as well. And, you know, when we're talking about like physical exercise, especially for middle schoolers and coming out of like the virtual learning, I think it's so important more than ever that they're getting these opportunities to participate in sports and play and compete. And I just think that's a really cool opportunity, especially because like even this school year for me, even though we don't have a high school football team, we're too small of a school to have that anyways. We play football like every day on the National Mall. And that's just something for me that, it provides me so much joy, and just being able to run around is so much fun. So I just think it's important that we continue to shine a light on students and all their academic and extracurricular successes, because it can mean so much. So yeah, I'm really happy we're doing this resolution, and congrats to the middle school team.
Awesome. Thank you. Mr. Haworth, now you can call the roll.
Dr. Gasoi.
Aye.
Mr. Chang.
Aye.
Ms. Wattenberg.
Aye.
Dr. O'Leary.
Aye.
Dr. Sutter.
Aye.
Ms. Thompson.
Aye.
Dr. Reid.
Definitely aye.
Mr. Patterson.
Definitely aye.
Mr. O'Sullivan.
Aye.
Ms. Lopez.
Aye.
Ms. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Bowie. President Parker.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous, and congratulations to Johnson.
Absolutely. Next up, we have SR 21-9, fiscal year 2023, a need for appropriations. To clarify for the public, the state board is required by law to submit a need for appropriations to the mayor for inclusion in her budget, or his or her budget, in this case, her budget, submission to the council. This process establishes what the state board believes is necessary to continue our very important work in the given fiscal year, as well as requests for additional funding for our new or expanding programming. And so with that, is there a motion to adopt this resolution?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Being properly moved as seconded. Mr. Haworth, can you please read the resolution into the record?
Thank you, Mr. President, and please bear with me. There's a lot of technical stuff in this one. State Board of Education resolution, fiscal year 2023 need for appropriations, SR 21-9. Whereas in 2013, the District of Columbia Council approved the State Board of Education Personnel Authority Amendment Act of 2012, effective April 27, 2013, to ensure that the District of Columbia State Board of Education had the authority to operate as an independent agency, including through the hiring of its own staff and preparing its own budget. Whereas DC Official Code 38-2652D3 reads, beginning in fiscal year 2013, the board shall prepare and submit to the mayor for inclusion in the annual budget prepared and submitted to the council pursuant to Part D of Subchapter 4 of Chapter 2 of Title 1, annual estimates of the expenditures and appropriations necessary for the operation of the board for the year. All the estimates shall be forwarded by the mayor to the council for, in addition to the mayor's recommendations, action by the council pursuant to DC Official Code 1-204.46 and 1-206.03C. Whereas the DC State Board of Education staff have prepared a budget that reflects the need for appropriations to meet the priorities of the three offices of the State Board: the Office of the State Board of Education, the Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education, and the Office of the Student Advocate in fiscal year 2023. Whereas the proposed fiscal year 2023 budget and related enhancements have been discussed at working sessions of the DC State Board of Education on October 6, 2021 and November 3rd, 2021. Whereas the DC State Board of Education is appreciative of the trust placed in it by residents and shall remain open and transparent about its spending. Whereas in the fiscal year that begins on October 1st, 2022, the DC State Board of Education proposes a need for appropriations of $2,399,400.22, with $425,071 being spent on program activities and the remainder on personnel in accordance with the attached chart. And whereas the DC State Board of Education proposes $1,770,000 in additional appropriations for the agency in the form of enhancement requests, and confirms that these requests would amplify and extend the capabilities of the agency. Now, therefore, be it resolved that on November 17th, 2021, The State Board approves its fiscal year 2023 need for appropriation and enhancements and requests the mayor include in her annual budget submission the estimate approved herein.
Is there a discussion? And we've talked about the budget at length. So I'm not surprised I'm not seeing many, if any, requests for discussion. And so with that, Representative O'Leary.
Mr. Hayworth sent us a little note about, could you explain that?
Yes, I can. And thank you for the question. So earlier today, I was notified by the chief financial officer that my original calculations, which the board had looked at the November 3rd working session, were slightly inaccurate because I had included salary figures for the Office of the Ombudsman, which were actually done through federal expenditure rather than through local funds. And so those have been removed from our need for appropriations because those are federal funds and should not be included, but are still part of our overall budget because they are already approved through the federal emergency spending.
Thank you very much.
With that, Mr. Hayworth, can you please call the roll?
Dr. Gasoi.
Aye.
Mr. Chang.
Aye.
Ms. Wattenberg.
Aye.
Dr. O'Leary.
Aye.
Dr. Sutter.
Aye.
Ms. Thompson.
Aye.
Dr. Reid.
Aye.
Mr. Patterson.
Aye.
Mr. O'Sullivan.
Aye.
Ms. Lopez.
Aye.
Ms. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Bowie. President Parker.
Aye.
The resolution is approved unanimously. Thank you all.
Thank you. The budget is not a small undertaking. So Mr. Hayworth, thank you for helping guide us through that process. Members, we are now to new business. Are there any items of new business that members would like to elevate at this time? Representative Sutter.
Thank you, President Parker. Just in the name of celebrating student athletics, the Girls on the Run DC 5K is this weekend in Anacostia Park on Sunday morning at 8 a.m. A lot of us have schools in our wards that have Girls on the Run teams. So I will be there cheering with a sign. So if you are out there running or you know girls in your ward running, I will be out there cheering wildly for all of them and encourage anyone who's around on Sunday morning to come out and join me in Anacostia Park at 8 a.m.
Love it. Love it. I have a feeling you're going to be joined by several members of the board. Representative Thompson.
I have a feeling I will not be joining Representative Sutter, mostly because I will not be in town. I got to go run to pick up my sister girl from college. So that's kind of important. But new business. So Representative Patterson and I attended, I don't even know what to call it, opening of, I think they called it a birdhouse library. I called them little libraries in Ward 7 at the Washington Tennyson Education Foundation. We were actually tasked, and we're gonna be better representatives like Representative Reid. We were tasked with asking for a ceremonial resolution. So we need to do that. Because we're selfish, it's selfish like for our wards and want more little libraries. So we want to encourage this behavior. So I just want to acknowledge, I believe they are the Metropolitan Women's Capital Group.
Metropolitan Capital City Club is what it's called.
Thank you. Because I knew I was kind of wrong. But I want to acknowledge that. And I just want to just say thank you, because that was, even though it was a bunch of stuff happening on Saturday, that was one of the highlights of my Saturday. I don't think I have anything else.
Thank you. Representative Chang.
Thank you. So I just want to note and open a conversation around something we have touched on before. We as a board have done a ton of work around teacher retention as a long-term policy priority. And I just wanted to flag and remind folks of the short-term needs in schools right now, including at School Without Walls in Ward 2, and what we can do to help make sure that the students in school right now are attending schools that are properly staffed. I know that at one of our previous meetings, Representative Sutter had followed up on, just what the HR backlog is, and I just wanted to raise that as something that and as something for us to be thinking about and continuing to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative O'Leary.
Two things. One of them piggybacks on what Representative Chang is talking about, that the substitutes are now being paid $300 a day for substitutes. The mayor found some money and it's been put out, and but the schools are woefully understaffed for substitutes. So please try to get the word out. Those of you who are watching and would like to apply for that, please contact DCPS or the charter schools. And the other thing, Representative Chang also, or Representative Thompson talked about the little library or whatever you want to call that. Mrs. O'Leary's Books for Friends is still rolling along. I have a plethora of books for your schools. And as Dr. Reid has just had a fainting episode because she still hasn't gotten in contact with me. I've got books for you. Just get in contact.
And you were in Anacostia today.
No, that doesn't help me to get books to you. Get in touch. We've got books for the holidays for your students in all your schools, Thanksgiving and Christmas. And the students are getting the books and getting them back home. So please get in touch with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Thompson, Reid, are those old hands?
No, it's a response.
Representative Thompson. Oh, Representative Thompson first.
I think Representative Chang is actually in front of me, even though it's a new hand.
Representative Chang, that's a new hand. I can't tell if you all are not taking down your
Old hand. Sorry, I'll take it down. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go with my new hand then. I'm not sure where this fits, but I do want to flag it because we all know I'll forget. I got a call from a parent at a charter school who has started to change their curriculum to include what they see as inclusive and affirming policies around gender identity for little teeny kids. And I suspect that we will see more of this, especially given that we just passed a resolution, and it's not all the same, but you know what I mean? Like, we are moving towards thinking about inclusion more broadly. I do know that people react to that differently. And I also know that there are a lot of things that we don't actually have common definitions, common expectations for how those practices roll out. And so I want to flag for maybe, I don't know if this goes into a committee or if it's an opportunity for us to invite some expert witnesses, but I suspect I will start to get more calls like this as more schools start to integrate this into their curriculum. I know it's something we care about and are paying attention to. And I think it's a place for learning and opportunity. So I want to flag that and put it on people's radar. I will acknowledge that I have some issues with the way this happened because they kind of just made the decision in the middle of the school year. And I tend not to like when schools make decisions in the middle of a school year. Like if somebody was just like, hey, we're doing this thing now, and didn't tell the parents before that, I would kind of be upset. But I do think there's probably some best practices that we maybe, some ways we can be helpful as schools start to make this transition.
I figured I was frozen. Thank you. Representative Reid.
Yes. We don't have enough time for dialogue, but Representative Chang kind of hit on something that like has me thinking, and I'm not sure if it's something that it's going to be like an individual board members thing, or if we want to think about it as a board. But like, I know there's starting to be legislation to address specific positions in schools. But my worry is that legislation might cover certain positions. Specifically, I know the librarian situation was emergency funding. There's legislation coming down, I believe, and I'm just using this as an example because I don't want to pick on anybody's legislation, but there's, I believe, legislation coming down to, make that more permanent, the librarian situation. But if schools need something else, I'm wondering, like, how can we make sure that there's some flexibility there? And if I have schools that, reading is something that's key to get kids to appreciate a library, I want to make sure that we can get those individuals in the building. So I'm just wondering if we want to do some thinking, or I'm looking at, like, I appreciate the sentiment of like, yes, we need a specific position, but then I'm also wondering if schools are going to want some flexibility, or they see certain things in their building that they're like, this is a more immediate need, as we're watching things trickle down. And then something all separate from this, I do know DCPS is rolling out their new budgeting format. So that's something to kind of, attend as engagement sessions are happening, engage with your schools to see if that model, again, fits the need. Initial kind of, I'm worried if it's population based, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I think we should listen to it, because I know right now numbers are all over the place related to, which kids are connected to schools, given the current COVID environment, et cetera. We just want to make sure that we don't get ourselves locked into something that we might end up reaping the benefits, or reaping after we get numbers come back up, or kids start coming back into the district, or anything. So those are just some things to kind of put on your radar if you want to talk about it. I don't know if people have sentiments, but those are just kind of things that listening to Representative Chang has me thinking about, that whole conversation of people in the buildings, and how we're using systems in our government to put people in the building, but then also making sure that some of those things don't accidentally backfire on us, or we're just, putting some thought to it. Thank you all for the time.
Thank you. Representative Sutter, is this a new hand, or?
It's a new hand. I just wanted to follow up with Representative Thompson's suggestion and say I'm happy to bring this to the Education Standards Committee. It seems to line up well with our work. And to note that I've also heard from two parents in Ward 6 schools. Fortunately, both had positive experiences and felt like their school did a good job. One mentioned that this was part of Pride last year. The other mentioned that it was part of sort of norming around the way we do things at our school. So happy to bring those to the committee as an example, and find time to bring this perhaps to a public meeting for a panel discussion.
Thank you. And that seems to conclude new business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
There is a motion on the floor by Representative O'Leary. Is there a second?
Second.
Being properly moved and seconded, all in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay.
Or nothing.
I believe the ayes have it, and therefore this public meeting of the State Board of Education is adjourned at 8:13 p.m. Thank you, members, for a great meeting, and thank you to our sister offices for presenting earlier, and those watching in the public.